All right, I swear I hate doing it, but y'all love to watch it. So here we go. It's time to update the college football top 25 heading into week 9 of the 2024 college football season after a wild week 8, which we'll talk a lot about in today's video. I'm going to be honest. The only thing I really get out of doing these top 25 videos is it forces me to take a look at about 30 teams, who they play last weekend. Did they win? Did they lose? Where were they ranked in like the AP polls and all that? Who do they play next week? So it would be a lie to say I don't get anything at all out of doing these videos. It does force me to take a look at a lot of these teams. But anyway, here we go. I'll do my best to tell you like where I had each team ranked last week or how far, if they moved up or down or whatever. But here's this week's top 25. I know some of you were upset because your team lost yesterday. But listen, just because your team stinks doesn't mean you have to. So check out today's video sponsor, Mando Whole Body Deodorant. Mando was created by a doctor. It's a high-performance whole body deodorant that you can literally apply anywhere and everywhere. For example, you can put Mando on your pits. You can apply Mando to your balls state. You can even put it on your feet. Mando is clinically proven to control odor better than shower with soap alone, and it comes in 4 amazing scents. You can get the bourbon leather, the clover woods, the Mount Fuji, or the Pro Sport. It even comes in unscented versions. Go ahead and click the link in the description box down below and check out Mando for yourself. Now, I decided to go with the starter pack. You get to choose your scent in a solid stick deodorant. You get the spray or the cream deodorant along with it as well. You get a free mini body wash and a free set of wipes. For the solid stick deodorant, I went with Mount Fuji. It smells really good. Goes on easy. Leaves no marks. Can't beat it. Here's the cream deodorant. I went with the Pro Sport in that one. It's really easy to use. It works really like lotion. Just put a little bit on your finger, rub it in. Good to go. Again, it goes on clear, smooth, no marks. Smells great. Body wash, bourbon leather. That was probably my favorite. And it also comes with the wipes. Make sure you click the link in the description box down below and check out Mando for yourself. The starter pack really is perfect for new customers. And right now, that starter pack is 30% off and includes free shipping. On top of that, if you use the link in the description of this video, they're going to give you an additional $5 off. That means you're going to be saving 40% off the cost of that starter pack. Check out Mando. The link is in the description down below. I've got Oregon at 1 this week. They were at 2 last week. I think I was pretty much on track with just about everybody else in terms of making polls last week. I had Texas at 1 last week. I had Texas 1, Oregon 2, Ohio State 3. I had Georgia at 7. I've moved to Georgia from 7 to 2. Of course, they beat Texas, the number 1 ranked team in the country, on the road in Texas-owned building by double digits, 2 scores, whatever, 30-15. A dominating game if you watched it. Texas never had a chance in that game. It was clear who the better team was from the first quarter on. Georgia defensively played a great game. Offensively, it was kind of a mess. Carson Beck, a bunch of turnovers again. Georgia, I thought, did run the ball well. ETN had almost 100 yards. They averaged 4 yards per carry as a team, held Texas to just 1 yard per carry. Just a dominating game by Georgia on the road. So moving them up to 2. Leaving Oregon at 1 because they're undefeated, or moving Oregon to 1 because they're undefeated. They've got a great win at home against Ohio State, who you can see I have ranked 3rd. No change for Ohio State. I had Ohio State 3rd last week. I've still got them 3rd this week. They were off this past week. They didn't play. They play Nebraska next week. Oregon played Purdue and absolutely destroyed them, but Purdue's one of the worst teams in the Power 4. They're 1-5 now, or 1-6. Purdue is. They're really, really bad. Oregon hosts Illinois this week. So another ranked game coming up for Oregon, a home game. Illinois hot off of a 21-7, I believe, win over Michigan this past weekend. You can see I've got Illinois at 22. That's up 1 spot from last week. I had Illinois at 23. Now I've got them at 22. So there's your 1, 2, and 3. At 4, I've got Miami. That's up 1 spot from last week. I had Miami at 5. I've moved them up to 4. They did win this past weekend against Louisville, one of the better teams that they've played so far this year. And per normal for Miami, it was another wild game. Miami is scoring 50 points a game, and they need to because their defense has given up a lot of points lately. They win this one 52-45. Just an unbelievable game by Cam Ward yet again, who I believe is the Heisman front runner at this point in the season. When you look at Miami's schedule, the rest of the way, it's hard to find a loss. They have the Florida State game this weekend, which is normally a big game in the world of college football, but good Lord, Florida State is bad. They're not anywhere on this list. This is a top 25 video, not a top 125 video, which is what you would have to do to find Florida State on a list like this. But of course, they lost to Duke. Miami should be able to handle business again, but I moved them up one spot to 4. Texas, I dropped from 1 to 5. Texas still searching for that good win. Good win, good loss, bad win, bad loss. These are terms you hear thrown around a lot when you start comparing teams that maybe don't play each other, right? So like in the case of Oregon, early in the season, people were hesitant about where to rank Oregon. Why? Not because they had lost games, but because they had bad wins against Idaho and I think Boise State. They won by 3, right? But then they get the Ohio State game at home. They win. That's obviously a good win, a big win, a win over a highly ranked team. So you vault Oregon up to 1. Georgia, on the other hand, has played 2 teams currently ranked in everybody's top 10, and they beat them both. They've played Texas and they've played Clemson. And I don't care what top 10 you look at, where you find it, whatever. Clemson and Texas are in everyone's top 10. And Georgia beat those 2 teams by a combined 46 points. They beat Clemson by 31, beat Texas by 15. Neither was a home game for Georgia. One was a neutral site game, and one was a true road game at Texas. So Georgia, obviously, with a couple of really good wins. They've got what used to be a good loss to Bama. It's looking like less of a good loss every week as Bama continues to struggle. They lost another game this past weekend. I moved them all the way down to 17. So I've got Texas at 5. They don't have a win to prop themselves up. They don't have a win at home over Ohio State like Oregon does. They don't have 2 wins against the top 10 like Georgia does. Ohio State's another team where, when you look at 3 and 4 here, Ohio State and Miami, neither really has a good win. Miami beat Florida. They beat Louisville. Not a lot of highly ranked teams on the schedules outside of the Ohio State-Oregon game, which, of course, Ohio State lost. Now, Ohio State will have a chance to turn that around. They play Penn State in a few weeks on the road at Penn State. They host Indiana, who's looking better by the week. And then, of course, they end the season with Michigan. Miami, you look at their schedule, there's no losses there. So it's just going to be a matter of who they play in the ACC championship game. Will it be Clemson? Will it be SMU? Will it be Pitt? We'll find out. Texas has several tough games remaining. They're on the road this week at Vandy. Blue blood killer Vandy, who already took down Bama this year after Bama played Georgia. Will they do the same thing to Texas? My gut tells me no. Texas probably rebounds and gets the win, but I've got Texas at 5. Penn State, I moved down to 6. It's nothing they did wrong. I had Penn State at 4 last week. Penn State did not play this past weekend. They were on a bye. Not punishing Penn State for anything, but again, hard to find a great win right now on Penn State's schedule. And when you start comparing them to some of the other teams that are ahead of them, Georgia, obviously, I had behind Penn State last week. I had Georgia at 7 last week, Penn State at 4. Georgia beating Texas is going to move Georgia ahead of Penn State, obviously. So that's going to be one spot. At least Penn State drops back, right? So anyway, I think Penn State's a really good team. They're going to get a chance to prove how exactly good they are. Are they the second best team in the Big Ten? Are they the first best team in the Big Ten? We're going to find all that out. Penn State will get a chance to play Ohio State coming up here in a little bit. That'll help sort of determine the pecking order. Right now, it looks like Oregon in the Big Ten championship game versus either Penn State, Ohio State, or Indiana, right? It's kind of how it looks right now. We'll see how it plays out over the next 4 or 5 weeks, but I've got Penn State at 6. They play on the road at Wisconsin this weekend. LSU I've got at 7. That's up 4 spots. To be honest with you, I think I probably had LSU a little too low last week when I had them at 11. They did win this past weekend. They went on the road and beat Arkansas 34-10. Arkansas is not a great team. Probably beating Arkansas in and of itself probably doesn't deserve a 4-spot bump, which I gave LSU this week. I think I may have just had them ranked a little bit a little bit too low. And Tennessee at 8, they beat Bama, so I moved them up. I had Tennessee at 14. I moved them all the way up to 8. As far as why are they behind LSU, LSU's just looked better. Who's got a worse loss, LSU or Tennessee? LSU has a week 1 loss to Southern Cal, not a great team. Tennessee has a loss to Arkansas, not a great team. So they both have 1 loss. Neither loss you would consider like a quote unquote good loss. So in order to determine, who do I have ranked ahead of the other, it's like, well, just which one has looked better? Tennessee's probably got a better win beating Bama than anything LSU has. So that would be something working in Tennessee's favor. But LSU to me has just played consistently better week to week outside of the week 1 game than Tennessee has. They lost to Arkansas, struggled at home against Florida, did beat Bama. Anyway, I think these are 2 top 10 teams. I think both of these teams have a chance to make the SEC championship game and or the playoffs. So we'll see. I don't know if LSU is better than Tennessee, and that's not what my rankings mean anyway. I don't rank teams based on who I think would beat who. That's called a power rating. I don't do that. LSU at 7, Tennessee at 8. LSU's got a massive game this weekend. They play Texas A&M on the road at Texas A&M, who I've got at 14. Now, LSU and Texas A&M are a little strange in that they both lost their week 1 games, which were non-conference games. And we kind of stopped talking about them for a few weeks after that. It's kind of just back burner type of deal. And then they just kept winning and winning and winning and winning and winning. And now here we are over halfway through the season, and neither team has lost a game since week 1. So it's a massive game this weekend within the SEC and for potential playoff seeding, because even though those teams are both undefeated in the SEC, by the way, LSU and Texas A&M are number 1 in the SEC right now. They're in first place. They're tied for first place in the SEC. They're ahead of Georgia. They're ahead of Texas. They're ahead of Bama. They're ahead of Tennessee. They have 0 conference losses, LSU and Texas A&M. One of those 2 teams will join the loss parade this week, is guaranteed, because they play each other. The other one is going to take a massive step towards the college football playoff. If LSU beats Texas A&M this weekend, they then play Alabama at home. LSU could lose that game to Bama. That would be LSU's first conference loss. But because Bama already has 2 conference losses, they would still be ahead of Bama in the SEC standings. And because they would have beaten Texas A&M this weekend, they'd still be ahead of Texas A&M in the standings. They'd have 1 loss along with Georgia and Texas. It's going to be very interesting to see how this SEC race works out over the last 5 or 6 weeks of the season, but the sort of the next game of the year within the SEC this year, and there's going to be a next game of the year every single week from now to the end of the season. But the next version of this year's SEC game of the year happens this weekend between LSU and Texas A&M. I've got the Tigers at 7 and the Aggies at 14. Tennessee at 8. We just talked about that. They beat Bama this past weekend 24-17. Neither team looked particularly good, especially offensively. Big Jalen Milroe turnover at the end of the game. His second or third turnover of the game seals the deal. Tennessee gets the home win, rushes the field again for no real reason this time, I don't think. I think it was kind of ridiculous that they rushed the field this time. I get it 2 years ago when Alabama was very highly ranked, and it was the first time Tennessee had beat Alabama in 15 years or something. But this ain't that same Alabama team. You just beat them 2 years ago at home, and they rushed the field again. A little bit strange there. Kind of a Clemson vibe going on for Tennessee with the rush in the field. Speaking of Clemson, I've got them at 9. I think Clemson's a really good team. They got blown out by Georgia in week 1, and this is the problem for Clemson, similar to some of the other teams that we've talked about. All right, their losses to a really good team, that's true, Georgia, but they got blown out by 31. And they don't have a ranked win to help offset that. Clemson's got 0 wins over ranked teams. They've only played 1 team currently ranked in anyone's top 25. That's Georgia. And they lost by 31. Now, it was way back in week 1, and of course, teams can get better over the course of the season. And I do think Clemson is better today than they were when they played that game with Georgia. And they're set up to make a run for the ACC championship here. They do have to play a game against Pitt on the road, which could be difficult. Pitt's undefeated. They play Louisville this week, I believe, which, or is it next week? They might be off this week and then play Louisville. Anyway, they got Louisville coming up. They got to play Pitt. They play South Carolina at the end of the year. So Clemson's got some potential landmines between now and the end of the season. but they look pretty good offensively. Their defense is not as good, I don't think, as maybe it has been in years past, but it's still good enough, I think, to win a lot of games, especially if Cade Klubnik and that offense continue to play well. But I've got them at 9, coming off of a 48-31 win against Virginia. And Virginia, I think, scored 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. So the game wasn't really that close if you watched the game. But they're on a bye this week after beating Virginia. I've got BYU at 10. All they do is keep winning. It looked like maybe they would catch their first loss this past weekend, but they found a way to win. They played Oklahoma State, who hasn't been great this year. In fact, Oklahoma State's been one of the most disappointing teams in the country. And Oklahoma State had a chance to win that game. I think Oklahoma State played their best game of the season last weekend against BYU. They had a lead late in that game. Ollie Gordon finally decided to show up. He was back to his old self, hurdling people and making great runs and dragging defenders down the field. But it wasn't enough. BYU found a way to win. Coming back in the end, they get a 38-35 win over Oklahoma State, and they remain undefeated and appear to be the class of the Big 12. They beat Kansas State already. And you see Iowa State sitting there at 11. I feel like Iowa State is kind of like the forgotten team in the Big 12. It just seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong places, or I don't know. I rarely hear anybody talk about Ohio State. There's a lot of talk about BYU. Oh, I can't believe BYU's undefeated. Have you seen this guy, the Jewish quarterback? Blah, blah, blah. Kansas State, people like their running game and the quarterback. And they just kind of skip over Iowa State. Now, I'm part guilty of that myself. I do have Iowa State ranked 11, and I have Kansas State ranked down at 16. But I do like Kansas State, and I still think if you made me pick right now, I think we're probably going to see Kansas State versus BYU in the Big 12 championship game, although it's very possible it could be BYU, Iowa State. BYU's already beat Kansas State, so BYU holds a tiebreaker over Kansas State. So BYU at this point is almost a shoo-in to make the Big 12 title game because they own a tiebreaker over one of the other top 3 teams, Kansas State. We'll see how it plays out, again, over the next 5 or 6 weeks like we will in all of these conferences, but it's going to be an interesting race. I've got BYU at 10. They play on the road at Central Florida this coming week. Iowa State, as mentioned, I've got there at 11. The AP, I think, has them in the top 10, maybe number 10. So I'm pretty close there with the AP on that. They beat, speaking of UCF, they beat them this past weekend 38-35. Not a very impressive win, though, for Iowa State. Central Florida's been disappointing this year. I thought they would be much better. I thought Goose Malzahn with KJ Jefferson at quarterback would be able to put something together this year, and it just hasn't really worked out for Central Florida. And Iowa State was lucky to get out of that game with a win. Again, they were down late as well, had to come back and win at the end, but they did win, and they remain undefeated. Indiana, to me, is the story of the weekend outside of the Georgia-Texas game. I watch a lot of football, but I'll admit I don't watch every game. I can't. It's impossible to watch every game, and I don't have a team of people that can watch games for me and feed me information and all that. So I watch 10 or 12 games every Saturday, 4 or 5 games during the week, I guess, between Thursday and Friday, but I can't watch every game. And I will admit that I had not watched very much Indiana until this past Saturday. I watched the entire Indiana game against Nebraska, and Uncle Lou was impressed. Indiana is an extremely well-coached team. Do they have the athletes and the players that a lot of these teams you see in the top 6, 7, or 8 have? No, they don't. But they are extremely well coached. They're never out of position. They don't miss tackles. They don't commit silly pre-snap penalties like false starts or offsides. They're very disciplined. They are a really good team, and they absolutely destroyed Nebraska. And while Nebraska's not a world beater, Nebraska was sitting on just 1 loss before that game. And that loss was to Illinois, a ranked team. So it's not like Nebraska is the disaster that we have seen them be over the last decade. They're a decent team this year. This is the best Nebraska team in at least the last 7 or 8 years, right? And Indiana just ripped their soul out. I mean, it was just an absolute beatdown in this game. They beat them 56-7. And I was extremely impressed. Now, again, I'll admit, that's the first full Indiana game I have watched. So for all I know, that's the best they've looked all year, and it's an anomaly or something. But it doesn't seem like it to me. Indiana seems like a legitimately good team. I'm not here to tell you that this means they're beating Ohio State or Oregon in the Big Ten championship game and making the playoffs and going 16-0 and winning a national title. I'm not here to tell you that. I'm not saying it ain't happening. I'm not here to pump up Indiana. this was just my first real exposure to Indiana in terms of a full game. I've seen some highlights. I've seen 10, 15 minutes of games here or there, flipping around on a Saturday. But I purposely sat down to watch this Indiana game this weekend because Nebraska was the best team they'd played so far. They were undefeated halfway through the season, Indiana was, and I wanted to see, exactly what it is Indiana had to offer, and I was impressed. I think they're a really good team. I moved them all the way up to 12. I had them at 16 last week. So a 4-point bump for Indiana gets them into my top 12. I've got Notre Dame at 13. That's a 1-spot drop from last week, and it's not anything Notre Dame did wrong. Notre Dame beat Georgia Tech this week. Now, Georgia Tech was out their quarterback, Haynes King, and Georgia Tech's kind of a one-man band in that regard offensively. Without Haynes King, it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that Notre Dame was going to find a way to win that game, and they did. They won 31-13. So I'm not punishing Notre Dame here. I think Notre Dame, despite what I think should happen, I think Notre Dame at this point is a legitimate threat to make the playoffs. They do have games against Navy coming up this weekend, and then Army a few weeks down the road, and one or two other potential stumbling blocks that they need to get past. I don't think Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois should even be eligible for the playoffs, considering the fact that they intentionally dodge a 13th game by not being in a conference, which could potentially give them another loss. They dodged that. They just, no, they don't want no part of no conference games or 13th game. So I just, to me, the loss to Illinois eliminates Notre Dame. But I'm not on the playoff committee, and I'm not an idiot. If they go 11-1, they're probably going to get in. So we'll see. They got Navy this week. I've got Notre Dame at 13. I've got Texas A&M at 14. This is pretty simple here. Each of these teams have one loss. Notre Dame's loss is a worse loss than Texas A&M's loss. But Notre Dame beat Texas A&M, so I can't pretend I didn't see that happen. I know it was back in week 1, and teams can get better or worse or different as the seasons go along, whatever. I get all that. But still, if it's hard for me to take two teams that have the exact same record and rank the losing head-to-head team ahead of the other. It's just hard for me to do that. So I've got Notre Dame at 13, Texas A&M there at 14. They beat Mississippi State 34-24, so a 10-point win for the Aggies. And as mentioned when I talked about LSU, massive game for them this week against LSU. Home game for Texas A&M, and it's going to be there's a lot on the line in this Texas A&M LSU game. So just reminder from earlier, neither of those teams have any conference losses. LSU and Texas A&M each have one loss. It's a non-conference loss. So right now, LSU and Texas A&M are tied for first place in the SEC. The winner of this game takes a massive step forward towards the SEC championship game at the end of the year. I've got Boise State at 15. Interesting conversation starting to go on about Boise State, Army, and Navy. Army and Navy have a chance to make a huge statement. They both play Notre Dame, and Navy plays Notre Dame this week. Army plays them here in a few weeks. Boise State had their opportunity to make a statement earlier in the year against Oregon, and they came up a little bit short. They lost by 3. Boise State doesn't have any games left on their schedule the magnitude of a Notre Dame like Army and Navy do. But they do play, I think, UNLV or Nevada they play this week. They play UNLV this week. They play Oregon State, which is still technically a Power 4 team at the end of the year. But still, those two games don't compare to Army and Navy's opportunity to impress people by potentially beating a Notre Dame. So we'll see what happens. I think if Army or Navy, either one, beat Notre Dame and then go on to win the conference championship game, I do think they would vault Boise State in a college football playoff ranking scenario, and either Army or Navy, whichever team it is that beats Notre Dame and wins the conference at 13-0, would move ahead of a Boise State in terms of that final playoff ranking and get the 5th guaranteed spot. If Army or Navy drop a game or don't win their conference or pretty much anything other than them going 13-0, which would include a win over Notre Dame, then I think it's going to be Boise State that gets that 5th guaranteed playoff spot. But we'll see how that works out again over the last month of the season. I've got Kansas State at 16. I really like Kansas State. I know they got blown out on the road by BYU. I mean, I don't know. Clemson got blown out by Georgia. So, sometimes you just show up and you lay an egg. And maybe that's what happened with Kansas State. But I love their quarterback, Avery Johnson. I like both of their running backs, Giddens and Stewart. And I think they've got a legitimate shot of winning the Big 12 if they can get to the Big 12 title game. Now, that's a big if because BYU's ahead of them, and BYU already beat them, and so owns a tiebreaker over Kansas State. So they need Iowa State to lose. And they may need Iowa State to lose twice. We'll see. BYU losing doesn't do anything to help Kansas State because BYU holds the tiebreaker there. They need Iowa State to drop some games. We'll see what happens down the stretch there. I really like Kansas State. They're a good team. Again, another team that's really well coached and fun to watch. Where were they at this weekend? West Virginia 45-18. Neil Brown on the way out, I think. We'll see. They play Kansas this week. Looked like a big game in the offseason, but Kansas is just terrible. They should handle Kansas. No problem. Alabama, I dropped all the way down to 17. They beat Georgia, and they can build a statue and make themselves a trophy or a plaque for that if they want, just like they did last year. If you listen to the Alabama fans, then all they care about is beating Georgia in the regular season or whatever. They don't care about nothing in the playoffs or the postseason. I guess, that's the difference between Alabama and Georgia, I guess. Alabama plays to beat Georgia in the regular season. Georgia plays to get to the postseason. Georgia plays for post. Georgia wants wins in December and January. Bama just wants to beat Georgia in September, which you did. Congratulations. But you've lost to Vandy in Tennessee. You've got a lot of issues on that team in terms of coaching. Who is coaching? Who's in charge? It doesn't appear to be Kalen DeBoer. Is it Malachi Moore? You've got players tweeting things after the game. This receiver tweeting that he doesn't think he's getting thrown the ball enough, and why are they throwing it to Ryan Williams when he's double covered, when I'm taller and wide open, and retweeting other people saying stuff. There's just a lot going on in and around Alabama right now. They caught their second loss, and you look at their schedule. They got to go to LSU. They got to play Missouri. They got to play Auburn. They got to play Oklahoma. It's hard to imagine the Alabama team that we've been watching play all season. It's hard to imagine them running the table. Could they? Yeah, they're extremely talented, but they're extremely talented with 2 losses through the first 7 weeks. It doesn't look like Alabama's making the playoffs this year. So, like I said, they can have that plaque or trophy or whatever for beating Georgia in week 4, but that's about all they're getting this year. It looks like. I hope y'all like blooming onions, because you're headed to the Outback Bowl. They lost to Tennessee. This week, they host Missouri. Missouri's quarterback went down last week, Brady Cook. I haven't had an update on him this week. We'll see, but obviously Missouri needs hit. Missouri's got no chance to win it without Brady Cook. So we'll see. We'll talk about that game when we do prediction videos later in the week. I've got Pitt at 18. I don't know what to do with Pitt. Much like Indiana, I'm going to admit I haven't watched a lot of Pitt this year. Now, I finally did watch an entire Indiana game this past Saturday. And maybe I'll watch Pitt this week. They play Syracuse. Syracuse isn't a great team. They're a decent team. They're probably a top 30. They're a top 30 team probably. If I had a top 30 instead of a top 25, definitely a top 35, Syracuse would be in it. So maybe I'll force myself to watch the Pitt game this week. But I don't know. I have a hard time. And it's not just me because, again, Pitt's undefeated, in case you didn't know. But start talking to somebody about ACC title game scenarios. They talk about Miami. They talk about Clemson. Hell, they talk about SMU before they talk about Pitt. I think SMU's better than Pitt. I admit it. I've got them ranked behind them because SMU's got a loss and Pitt doesn't. But SMU, here's some trivia. Who's SMU's only loss of the year? BYU on the road by 3. So SMU's only loss is to a top 10 team by 3. That's it. And they've pretty much blown out everybody else they played. Why is Clemson 9 and SMU 19? Clemson has 1 loss. It's by 31. And Clemson hadn't beat a single ranked team. SMU beat Louisville. Louisville's not ranked, but it's probably the best win they have. Anyway, I'm not saying SMU is better than Clemson. I'd pick Clemson to beat SMU, but SMU's got 0 conference losses. So does Pitt. So does Miami. So does Clemson. 2 of those 4 teams are going to go to the ACC championship game. Clemson has to play on the road at Pitt. Miami has to play on the road at Syracuse. SMU's toughest game left is at home versus Pitt. Pull up SMU's schedule and look at it. It's hard to find a loss on there. SMU might go 11-1. We'll see. I've got Army at 20. Oh, who does SMU play this week? Did we mention that yet? SMU, where is SMU? I know they're on there. I got to scroll down. I promise I know what I'm doing. I'm a professional. They play on the road at Duke. They beat Stanford this past week 40-10, and that's they've done a lot of that. So it's Clemson, to their credit. But Clemson's got Clemson's got a 31-point loss to a top 10 team. SMU's got a 3-point loss to a top 10 team. SMU 19, Clemson 9. I can't explain it, but there you go. I've got SMU at 19. Army at 20. They absolutely destroyed somebody again this past weekend. East Carolina 45-28. Army's unbelievable. And yeah, they run the triple option and they run the ball. Their quarterback can throw the ball too. So they're not as one-dimensional as some previous Army teams, even though they still run the triple option, but we'll see. They play Notre Dame in a couple of weeks. Navy plays Notre Dame this week. They're going to have a chance, Army and Navy. They're going to have a chance to prove to everybody whether or not they belong in the conversation for the college football playoff, because they're both going to get a crack at Notre Dame here. And I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. It would be absolutely hilarious if a service academy, Army or Navy, were the reason Notre Dame did not get into the playoffs. There's a running joke when it comes to Notre Dame about how they won a bunch of national titles back in the 50s by beating up on a bunch of service academies. It's just a running joke that's been around the college football world forever. How funny would it be if those same service academies were what cost Notre Dame a shot at a national title in 2024? It could happen. Notre Dame's going to have to beat both of them if they want to go to the playoffs. We'll see. But Army, pretty good team. I've got Navy at 21. Same thing. They beat Charlotte 51-17. They play Notre Dame this coming week. Playoff implications. It sounds weird to say, but look, all you people that hated on the 12-team playoff, I understand all your reasoning. I get it. I even agree with some of it. This Navy Notre Dame game would be an absolute afterthought were it not for the 12-team playoff. This is a massive fucking game for both teams. Both of these teams have playoff aspirations heading into November. And it's because we have a 12-team playoff. Notre Dame wouldn't get anywhere near a 4-team playoff would have lost to Northern Illinois. And Army and Navy would never get anywhere near a 4-team playoff under any circumstances at all, ever, period, for any reason. But now we got 12, and it's the 12-team playoff, if nothing else, is giving us a ton more games over the last 5 or 6 weeks of the season that are huge and meaningful and all of that towards postseason play. I'm for one, and I'm happy about it. I think this is going to be the best 5 or 6 weeks of football we've ever seen over the next 5 or 6 weeks, because every single weekend you're going to have multiple games with massive playoff implications. Texas A&M and LSU this weekend, Navy and Notre Dame this week. I could go on, and it's going to be like that every single week from now to the end of the season. Navy plays Notre Dame. I got them at 21. Illinois, I've got at 22. I had them at 23 last week, so I moved them up one spot after they beat Michigan. Like 21-7 was the score. In that one, Michigan's down bad. Illinois wins some kind of award for the best helmet of the year. Did y'all see those Illinois helmets? They looked like leather helmets. I saw a 2-minute thing on that on, I don't know if it was Sports Center or what. Every one of those helmets was hand painted, airbrushed. Even the stitching, if you get a close-up shot of the helmet, there's stitching in the leather helmets. That's not real stitching. It's not a leather helmet. The stitching was airbrushed. It looks like a fucking leather helmet. Anyway, they win the award for best helmets of the season so far. I really like those helmets, and they got the win. Ole Miss, I've got them at 23. That's down one spot, not for any reason at all. They didn't play this past weekend. Now, why the AP has them all the way up at 18, that's hard for me to understand. I don't know why. I don't know why anybody would have Ole Miss that high. I've got them at 23. Illinois won, so I just swapped Ole Miss and Illinois. Ole Miss was off. This weekend, and they play Oklahoma this coming weekend. Oklahoma might be the worst team in the SEC. Wow. I mean, say that out loud, and I'm not trolling. I know they beat Auburn earlier in the year. How many people watching right now would pick Oklahoma over Auburn if they were playing tomorrow? Oklahoma might be the worst team in the SEC. Ole Miss gets them this week. I've got Missouri at 24. Missouri dodged a big bullet this past weekend. Of course, they got blown out by A&M a couple of weeks ago. Then out of bye week, now they host Auburn. Brady Cook goes down in the first half of that game. The backup has to come in, and Missouri was losing this game till late in the fourth quarter. And again, Auburn is horrific. Missouri's not living up to the hype. Let's face it. They're 6-1, and I get that. But if you look at their remaining schedule, they've got maybe 3 or 4 losses coming. Oklahoma, I don't think, is a guaranteed win for Missouri at this point. Missouri just looks out of sync to me. They'll probably lose to Bama this weekend. I know it's been fun to laugh at Bama, but the game's in Tuscaloosa. Would you pick Missouri to go in there and win right now, even with Brady Cook? I don't know. I don't know. They're not going to live up to the hype, I don't think, Missouri. And then I've got Vandy at 25 again. Look, I'm leaving at Vandy at 25 till they lose again. You don't get very many opportunities to rank Vandy in a top 25. They've got the win over Bama, and they haven't lost since then. They're on an absolute roll. And this week, they play Texas. I don't even know what's going to happen. I don't even want to think about what's going to happen to the internet if Vandy beats Texas this weekend. The internet will melt down. There ain't enough trash in all of Texas for those idiotic, dumbass fucking fans to throw on the field if they go out there and lay an egg and get beat by Vandy. There ain't enough trash in the entire state of Texas to throw on that shitty-ass fucking field out in Austin if the Shorthorn man loses to Vandy. And after the way the fans embarrassed themselves last week in a humiliating loss to Georgia, I, for one, will be pulling for Vandy. Have a good morning.